Greetings and welcome back to another episode of the Aaron Jacobs podcast. I'm Aaron Jacobs, a former public school band director based out of the state of Ohio, now turned health coach, teacher wellness advocate. And today I want to talk about a symptom that I think a lot of teachers experience, and certainly one that I experienced that was a major sign that I was in the middle of a major depressive episode, and what ultimately ended up causing me to need to leave the profession. And that is noise overstimulation. Silence is a beautiful thing. And we already know that our jobs are very overstimulating. We're bombarded with student question after student question. Kids are generally pretty high energy. And when they're with their friends and other kids they want to talk to, it's a very generally just noisy environment. Even in the best of times, in terms of a structured environment, cognitively, you're also still on. Classes are very well maintained. You're still cognitively very locked in, as the kids would say, to maintain the order in the classroom. I'm sure a lot of other music teachers, you can relate to this, but noise overstimulation ultimately was my demise as a music teacher. And it led me to dislike sound. I ended up not liking music to the point now where I will fully admit a little vulnerability here and transparency. The idea of going to what I know will be a very loud live music event is very unsettling to me. And I feel bad about this. We actually have somebody at our gym who's a really phenomenal singer. She sings and does performances with more rock music and just bars, like more loud environments. And she's a really wonderful gal. And I would love to go and support her. But admittedly, when I think about going to one of her events, which I watch some of the replays on Facebook, and that's how I know she's a great singer. But I get, admittedly, a little anxiety stirs up in me when I think about that kind of an environment and that kind of noise level for me. And I will say, I do think that I'm healing, because when I would finish a day of teaching, because I was so overstimulated with sound between the music that was being played, noise from kids and humans and kids being themselves, the general natural chaos of a school day, and then doing all of the after school responsibilities, having to be on in front of kids, the amount of noise overstimulation that I experienced as a high school music teacher at a really successful program that ran a competitive marching band, like it was just too much noise for one person, too many times out of the year, and not enough desaturation from sound. And as a result, I actually didn't like music for a time. I started to really resent music because it's any extra noise. Some of the students that had me as a teacher in my last year of teaching in the school that I taught at, they'll remember fall semester, I was hypersensitive to any extra noise that happened in the classroom, like accidentally bumping into a percussion instrument. I mean, that was like clear sign right there that I was in noise overstimulation mode as a symptom of a major depressive episode. And so first of all, I want to mention that if this feels like you, and you are especially a music teacher, where you are saturated with more noise than the average public school teacher, I would suggest that you definitely seek professional assistance with that before it becomes a worse problem. Because if you know my story, and I told this, I believe, last year on the podcast, this resulted in I had multiple months of suicidal ideation. I would like to see people be able to prevent that in themselves before it becomes that bad. And just not getting enough of a break as someone who worked, even though, yes, a public school teacher, I was working almost 12 months out of the year. I would get a few weeks off in June. And yes, I would take time away from work during Christmas break and spring break. But I was still dealing with some work things here and there. I was never really shutting my email off permanently. I had to be on my email 12 months out of the year because of the nature of the beast. And if you run a highly successful competitive band program, you know the stress and you know the constant loop of things is like that. And desaturating yourself from noise, I think, is so crucial. And so if you don't do that, you could end up where I did, unfortunately. And the result was in the classroom is my resentment towards sound started to come across like resentment of human beings, which in this case for me would be kids. There's a lot of interactions that I can remember my last year that I definitely don't feel great about, because it was the noise and overstimulation that came across as me not liking other people. And especially when I really feel like most of the students that I had come to know me as somebody who is a pretty caring and empathetic individual, and who is willing to be, understanding that letting kids be kids to a certain degree. And it's when you teach, having your class be like Play-Doh in your hands, where you need to squeeze it enough to hold it in place, but not so much that it runs through your fingers. That was always my philosophy. But then some of the symptoms I was starting to exude, in part due to this noise saturation, it came across like I was trying to be much more controlling than the kids had known me for, and like I wasn't myself. And so I even remember a couple of kids that they were very sensitized to someone losing their cool. And I remember one interaction with one kid who was like, I almost kind of laughed because it just really didn't even seem like you. I was experiencing compassion fatigue, and a condition that actually the Cleveland Clinic has an article about. So shout out Cleveland Clinic. As always, I love to cite them when I can on the podcast because I'm a lifelong Clevelander and a hometown guy. And we have one of the best hospital systems in the world, damn it. So here we go. So I was experiencing, and now I can put a term to it, musical anhedonia. And I may not be saying that quite right, but it's a common symptom of many mental health conditions. So this is not like the main cause that is treated, but this is a big sign that when you essentially have an interest that changes, you have an aversion to things that you normally would derive pleasure from. In my case, music. It's obviously a big telltale sign that you're potentially experiencing a major mental health episode. And I will link this article from the Cleveland Clinic in the show notes because I do think it's a good read. If this is the first sign that you might be experiencing a major mental health episode, there isn't really a ton of research locked in on the causes of this particular aspect of depressive episodes, nor is there specific treatment yet for something like this as of now. So further research, I think, is needed. But especially, I think this is a phenomenon with how our society works, that more and more people are going to experience this type of sensory overload, musical anhedonia, if you are a music teacher. Some signs you might want to watch out for, by the way, are feeling irritable and angry when you hear noise. You avoid listening to music on the way home from work. You feel emotionally numb while you're teaching, especially at music. And you just want to be left alone. You become antisocial. And I've always been a bit more of a loner as an only child. So it was a little bit harder on my case to detect that as an aspect of what was a major depressive episode. That being said, as teachers, and if you work in a more noisy and more overstimulating profession, I have some prescriptions for you. Even though, yes, one, I'm not a medical doctor, and two, there's obviously not, as I've mentioned, as much research in the treatment and prevention of this type of a condition and this aspect of depressive episodes. But I can tell you some things that worked for me and some things that probably everybody should start doing as a matter of a general health protocol. Yes, I think nutrition is incredibly important. Yes, fitness is incredibly important. Yes, hydration is incredibly important. But in terms of the maintenance of our mental health, what are protocols that we can do? And I have three. Two of them that I utilize, and one of them I actually found hasn't worked for me. The first one that I found that I suggest but has not personally worked for me is journaling. A lot of people find that helps to write thoughts down and write them on paper. Me personally, I've never found it valuable. I've found it to be a bit of a waste of time. I don't enjoy it. I don't think it's really ever helped me. I committed to a journaling routine for a couple of months. No, I didn't first dip my face in a big bowl of Saratoga spring mineral water with ice, like that one guy who's had the video blow up about his morning routine. But I did commit to journaling every morning and writing down my thoughts. And I felt like it became redundant after a while, and it was not beneficial to me. But there are two more things that I find beneficial that I still apply to this day. In talking with a few of my teacher clients, especially if they teach music, they definitely like to drive home in silence to desaturate from sound. The first prescription I have that I actually think works well for me that I still try to apply to this day is do not sit in your car and doom scroll after work. That is a big one. I actually put out a short piece of content last weekend about this. Sit in their car and just scroll on their phone. I think it is an utter waste of time. I don't think it's doing anything for your mental health. And all you're doing is, even though it's not loud music potentially, you could be finding people that are just talking. You could be looking at funny videos. You could be looking at cute videos. One of the things that I could easily doom scroll that I try to stay away from because I know it will suck time away from me. I love videos all about like animal rescue. I think it's adorable. It's heartwarming. I love dogs. I think they're wonderful. I love dog rescue stories. And so like I can get sucked into that real quick. And even though that's, I think, a pretty positive piece of content to watch, it's still more noise and more information for your brain to process. And because our world is so noisy, we have every bit of information at our fingertips that we could possibly hope for, pretty much, with the use and the advancement of smartphone technology. And now with AI also furthering that, your ability to take in a lot of just stuff into your brain is increased exponentially with the advent of technology. And I never remember feeling like overloaded from a sensory perspective growing up as a kid. Was I playing video games as a kid? Sure. But when I logged off the video game, or I stopped watching TV, I really wasn't looking at a ton of screens. I was doing something else off of a screen. But now so much of our work and so much of our general environment is very stimulating because we have so much stuff going on with screens these days, even as adults. And so I think the last thing you should do when you get out of work, regardless of your job, is sit in your car and scroll on your phone. Even if the content you're consuming is actually good or educational, it doesn't matter. Even if your content is educational, too much of a good thing is still too much. As we say, the dose makes the poison. You can, in fact, drink too much water. You can, in fact, overeat good food if it's too many calories. You can, in fact, overdo it, even with good things. So I would encourage everyone to limit their screen time immediately when they get out of work. It's not just about limiting your overall screen time throughout your entire life. It's about getting that moment of disconnect and silence. And as you are in silence, in your car, your commute home, focus on your breathing. Deep breaths in and out. Stay calm. And focus on the rhythm of your breath being symmetrical. That has been very, very good for my mental health, my general mental clarity. And the other thing it allows you to do when you sit in silence, you're going to notice just how chaotic your brain is when you have nothing else to fixate on for stimulation. And my second tip that has worked for me, and my third tip, is take that same time of silence and make sure you do that right before you go to sleep. One thing that worked really well for me in starting to fix my sleep when I was on some antidepressant medications, which some of them can really negatively affect your sleep, was taking 10 minutes to just meditate, really. And here's some strategy if you've never meditated before. No, it's not a religious thing. You can pray if you want to. I will just be transparent. I am a Christian, but I don't use that time for prayer. I'm using it to get my mind to operate clearly and without feeling frantic. It's very often when I'm not looking at a screen or when there's nothing else to serve as an external stimuli for me in my mind, I usually find that I have 3-4 thoughts just kind of bouncing around about different topics simultaneously in my brain. And that's just chaos. So give your brain time, especially in the evening, to work those thoughts out. This is another slight adaptation here as well. And it might be a good idea for some of you, even though journaling didn't work for me, keeping that notepad or that journal wherever you're meditating so that if you have a passing thought that you need to write down, you can write it down and get it out on paper at that point. And again, the goal with the meditation is to work your mind to be only able to focus on a singular thought continuously. And then eventually not have any thoughts, which is incredibly challenging to do. I've only been able to get to that, like not thinking about anything. I've only been able to do that a handful of times. It's very challenging for your mind to be that calm. But when I get my mind to be on that level of calm or more calm, where I can easily focus on a single stream of conscious thought and not bounce around between all this craziness in my brain, my sleep is better. I sleep longer, deeper. I'm happier. I'm calmer, and I make better decisions. So as a former music teacher who part of his major depressive episode was brought on by overstimulation and noise saturation, take some preventative care. Even if you are not in a position where this is a problem for you right now, I would encourage you to take some preventative measures with how overstimulating our world is. And I'm not saying technology is all bad. I think it has more bad than good for the younger and younger you give more technology access to younger and younger kids, of course. But for us adults, let's be honest, I would not be able to run my fitness business unless I had technology. I would not be able to have workouts programmed and demonstrations for everything for my clients. I would not be able to communicate as effectively and show my clients how to do things better if all of the technology infrastructure we have and rely on nowadays was not there. But at the same time, now that I'm using it more, I try to actively, mindfully disconnect so that I don't end up in another situation where I am sensory overstimulated as I was about 1.5 years ago. Thank you all very much for listening to the Aaron Jacobs podcast, where we talked about sensory and noise overstimulation, some warning signs to watch out for, and some easy habits that you can do for maintenance for your mental health. Everyone, take care and be well. And don't be afraid of the sound of silence.